I didn't see him. I didn't see him. No. You ready, Mr. Executive Director and Mr. Vice Chair? Here. Was on the over there? Rick, nice job, Rick. Extraordinary meeting, really. Extraordinary effort and great pulling it all together.
Have that many people I was wondering why we had all the people there. It's great. I would say thank you, everyone. So I've never seen that in 6 years.
The last speaker was so didn't have Pulitzer. That'll carry me for a month.
Right.
Really?
No. You have time to see we can start.
Oh, we can start. Great. All right, good afternoon. I know it's been a long afternoon for many, so Executive Director and I and the Vice Chair stand here for any Q&A. It's a pretty eventful, consequential, monumental meeting, which should not have been 30 days ago. Questions? Yes, sir. Just identify yourself so we can...
Larry Hicks from
Yep.
StarLedgerandEngine.com. Simple question. What's the economic impact of the wage increase as far as cost to contractors, and what's the ripple effect as far as revenues that can be generated to the Port Authority and to some of the contractors?
That's a harder question to answer. Rick, you want to take a stab at that because of the way it lays out, and there's really not a finite number in terms of how many folks are actually impacted right now. So I don't want to give you a number, Larry, that's not accurate. The number of workers were talked about between, 14,000 and 20,000, and you really can't, it'll be a different number at every step and stage, which have been costed out.
I think the context here is that there are 70,000 workers at 75,000 workers at all three airports. What our estimates are, this depends on whether workers are part-time or full-time, but approximately 20,000 of those 70,000 workers are, to our ability to calculate, currently at the minimum wage, either in New Jersey or in New York. So our estimate in terms of the number of individual workers at the three airports whose wages will be raised by the increased minimum wage policy is approximately 20,000. The other background here, though, is obviously the minimum wage in both states is going up, so that the impact on the employers at the airport should essentially be a net of the increase that will occur by virtue of the state law increases. We're working on the estimates in terms of actual impact, but the clear lesson from the studies that have been done from increased minimum wages is the dramatic reduction in turnover that occurs by virtue of workers earning a higher wage and of the job being more desirable. Based on several discussions with employers, employers themselves benefit enormously from reduced turnover. It is very expensive for an employer to have rates of turnover which we calculate at the airports among minimum wage workers are as high as 40%. That is an astonishing rate of turnover. So that the benefit that employers will secure by virtue of the higher wages, again, needs to be netted off against increased wage expense. And the final point is that this is going to be phased in, and that will enable employers to plan for it, and we believe the net impact will be modest.
Next question. Yes, sir. Just
Dave Porter from AP. I had two questions, actually. First was you can actually require contractors, employers at the airport to pay these wages to their workers, right? I mean, you are able to do that. I think there was an issue with that back. What was it, 4 years ago when it went up to 10? There was weren't some companies kind of balking at it or something, and I don't know if you're able to require them to pay their employees.
we believe we can, and we believe, having spoken with and reviewed this with our counsel, it is entirely defensible and appropriate.
And the other question was, for those of us who've been coming to the meetings for a while, and seeing the workers coming to the meetings for years now, why did it take so long to, it's been 4 years since they were raised to 1010. It seems like it was a long time. I'm just, what?
Well, I mean, a part of it is that you have, for the most part, a fairly new composition of the board. Rick and I both got here in our official capacities in August. Most of the board came together in July. And so it is new in some respects to those of us who have only been here for maybe 6 or 7 months. And it's been refreshing. I will tell you, I heard the comments upstairs. The life stories you hear from some of the individuals is so heartfelt. It is so gripping. It is so educational. And like I said, for those of us, some of us who have had parents and ourselves go through minimum wage, you kind of go back in history and understand why it's so important to make sure you have a wage that they can live with. Or everybody in the board gets that. I think Jeff said, Linford said, that this board works very well together. There's a human condition we all kind of share. I think that's the word that you used. It just took us a while. It's an enormous operation that goes on with the port every single day. It is literally drinking from a fire hose that Rick manages every single day. It reached a threshold where we said this was really important. At the last board meeting, we had a very spirited discussion in executive session, and we pulled all the commissioners together. And we weren't all together on the scheduling of how, why, and when, and we took it really as a priority. We spent a lot of time meeting with a lot of the folks who will be impacted, the family members, experts. We read a lot of the background information of places where this has been implemented. We had to do our homework, and it all came together, and I couldn't be more thrilled. I'm happy that we actually beat our timetable of 60 days. Let's see what happens in the 60-day review, and hopefully there'll be an adoption of what was been introduced or something very similar in June.
I'd also put just one other framework around it. If you look at every one of the top 20 airports in the United States, every single one has a minimum wage enacted either by the airport authority or by the governmental jurisdiction in which the airport is located, has a higher minimum wage than the minimum wage applied elsewhere. So there has been a widespread recognition of the desirability of having airport workers who contribute to an environment where security demands are higher and where performance demands are higher. And then just to put it into context, we are in one of the highest, if not the highest cost metropolitan area in the country. If you look at Los Angeles as a location which is a high cost area, their minimum wage at their airport is $17 an hour. So that part of this calculation has to be against the cost of living in the New York metropolitan area.
One of the things that came out in the review and research that we looked at is the longer you have these workers, the less turnover, the more safe it becomes, whether it's aviation, port, or port experiences. The longer they're there, the evidence was right in front of you, the safer it becomes because you have more experienced workforce. And the other thing that was borne out, which was a little surprising, is the employers, a large percentage of employers that said there was a noticeable and huge and tangible benefit by having a higher wage, attracting a longer serving employee, and it was a win-win on both sides. That surprised me just a little bit. Yes, in the back.
So this will drive up the costs for the subcontractors and contractors to the airlines. Assume that will be passed on to the airlines. How have the airlines told you they'll pass this on to their customers?
Well, I think a couple issues. I think to Rick's point, assuming in New York the minimum wage is $15, and this will ride at $15.60 for a period of time before it moves up to $16.20, $17, $18, $19. We're assuming New York and New Jersey at some point in the very near future are going to have a slow escalating minimum wage. So I think inevitably the circumstances in which we are talking about today was going to visit New York and New Jersey and those three airports in a very near future. So to say we're going to put additional costs beyond what was going to happen in the normal course of the legislature, both in New York and New Jersey, is probably, like I said, this was going to happen. As far as we have had discussions with some of the stakeholders, and again, the reason for the 60-day review period, we want to hear from everybody. So it's going to be a wide open period. Some people say it's not enough. Some will say it's too much. Some will say it's just right. But we're going to take very seriously those comments in the May meeting and spend 30 days poring over any additional information we receive, either independently or through the public commentary, and come back and have some response and hopefully a resolution in June.
Is it fair to assume it's going to drive up the cost of airline tickets at these airports?
I can't assume that. You'd have to ask the airline folks that. I won't assume that. Yes, Ryan.
Ryan Hutchins from Politico. This wasn't on the agenda. You talked about 3 days ago. It wasn't necessarily going to happen. Can you tell us what came together in the last 3 days that this occurred today?
Well, this has been, when we talked about this at the last meeting, it became front and center priority, and we started scrambling, with even greater frequency than we had before. And Rick was leading round-the-clock discussions internally, meeting with the unions, meeting with others. We were having discussions daily. And frankly, we didn't know up until a few days ago, I didn't know whether we were going to have a broad consensus, whether we were going to agree on the parameters. It all kind of came together in the last few days. There was no grand design to say, hey, look at us. It just really just came together in the last couple of weeks.
Anybody else, or we're all good? Can we talk about Gateway real quickly?
Richard Bagger's here. Richard.
Coming in from the bullpen for Gateway.
Could we get your reaction to how Gateway was treated in the omnibus bill and what it spells for the current state of play on Gateway?
Yeah, the transportation infrastructure provisions of the Omnibus Appropriations Act reflect a good, strong, bipartisan compromise, right? And an example of the system working well. And I think we can really point to the advocacy from the bi-state, bicameral, bipartisan congressional delegation from this region, from the New York and New Jersey, Senate and House, Republicans and Democrats working together with one voice for the importance of transportation infrastructure funding. And the provisions that were included in the appropriations legislation that's now before the Congress will provide funding sources that will be available for potentially advancing some of the gateway projects in this year. The funding that's been made available through Amtrak, right? I think the number there was potentially $388 million that would be available through Amtrak. Additional funding for transit support for New York and New Jersey. I think that number is $153 million, as well as an increase in the New Starts program. And as you know, Gateway has already filed applications for both the Portal Bridge project and the Hudson Tunnel project with the New Starts program. So transportation infrastructure funding, positive development, and one that I know the Gateway team and the Gateway Development Corporation will be following up on as we continue to move forward with the projects, the Portal Bridge, the Hudson Yards concrete casing, and the preparation and potential early works construction on the tunnel project.
Just following up on that, your New Starts rating for both Portal Bridge and Gateway doesn't meet the criteria to move forward with funding, and the administration is telling us that they'll have some sort of veto power over the rest of this $541 million. I mean, what convinces you that they're going to let this go forward when they've shown no signs of doing so in recent months?
Well, the whole program and each of the projects that comprise it require collaboration with, cooperation with, partnership with the federal government. That's important financially, and it's important with the particular elements of moving each of these projects forward. As Steve Cohen said following our board meeting at Gateway last Friday, we remain optimistic and confident that the project is going to move forward, and the developments in the Appropriations Act, I think, only give us more reason to be optimistic that their funding sources, while not explicitly identified as gateway items, are sources that are available to be drawn upon this year in potential federal funding to be joined with the state funding that is in place. That is in place for both the Portal Bridge project and the Hudson Tunnel project.
Larry, last question. This mean that Portal Bridge is going to be the first project to move, or is there a different plan?
Well, Portal Bridges is the project that is most ready to go. It is designed. It is fully permitted. It has the early construction work underway right now. It has its local funding share in place and committed. And the piece that was missing there is a federal share to the funding. But I know the Gateway team is committed to moving all three projects: the Portal Bridge, the Hudson Tunnel, and the concrete casing program, moving them forward to their next to their next stages this year.
Just a timing question on this. I have to imagine that Related and Oxford are pretty eager to get ready for the second phase of their monster project there. If they start on that and you're not building the encasement, I mean, that might mess up the whole Gateway project. I mean, what's the timing there? How much time do you have to?
Well, the third phase of the Hudson Yards concrete casing is an essential element of the program. And there's early construction work there that has now been authorized, with the Port Authority Board having taken action one meeting ago, February, to authorize spending for half of the cost of the early works construction on the phase 3 of the concrete casing. I mean, moving a LIRR emergency services building, and Amtrak will be paying the other half of that. And that work needs to happen first. And so that work is being funded, and that can move forward. But the construction of phase 3 of the concrete casing is going to need to be relatively quickly following up on that.
Thank you all
Okay.
very much.